All right, guys. Welcome to today's Mac Forum Sunday video chat for Sunday, February 28th, 2016. Hope that you all are having a good evening. As usual, we're going to have a forum update and a few tips and tricks, as well as some other Mac related news. Hope that you enjoy this evening's show. First of all, we want to say welcome to our newest member, Mandy Solemn, and welcome to all of our new members who have joined in the previous week. We have a total now of about 247,000 members, and hopefully, if you haven't joined, hopefully you'll find something interesting and join us. Keep in mind that becoming a member is the best way, or really is about the only way to get a question answered. It's not very productive to post a question in it through the contact us thread. That's something that is only seen by a handful of the members who are part of the moderation team, and they may or may not know the answer to your question. You want to go ahead and become a member. Doesn't cost you anything. Hopefully, you'll uh, find that there's enough useful information to justify becoming a member. I know even for as long as I've been using Macs, I still find a lot of useful information from members who know various aspects of things that I don't get to play around with very much. So enjoy the time, check in when you can. And if you can't check in, have a look at our email list, which gives you an idea. Sign up for that. Get an idea of what some of the more trending topics are on the forum, and we'll try to keep you up to date as well during our Sunday night shows here. So let's get right into everything. This week we have, as usual, a few tips and tricks, as well as some other issues that have come up during the week. I want to first of all mention, uh, by way of some forum news and some interesting threads and the like, we'll get to those first, and then we'll move down to the tips and tricks kind of thing. First of all, uh, there are still uh, a lot of threads and discussion in various places about Apple's response to being asked by the FBI to decrypt uh, the iPhone used by one of the accused terrorists in the San Bernardino case. That is still ongoing as far as discussion about whether it should or shouldn't be done. The tech world seems to be split on this issue, um, with some people saying, "Yeah, go ahead and do it. We don't really mind that you're decrypting the phone. I don't have." Essentially, the argument being, in some cases, we've got to err on the side of caution. In other cases, the argument is, well, hey, I don't have anything to hide. Why am I worried whether somebody could conceivably decrypt my iPhone? Apple's um, position on this seems to be essentially that, for one thing, one of the problems is that once this gets out, then theoretically, if it becomes known by ne'er do wells of one form or another, then they can decrypt other people's phones, whether they have a legitimate reason to do so or not. That's one possibility. Also, uh, I know that I've seen some writing and discussion that it amounts to what in logic is sometimes referred to as a slippery slope theory. And I know that in logic, the slippery slope is not necessarily applicable because you don't have to, once you start down a path, you don't have to go all the way down the path. I mean, that's why a lot of people consider the slippery slope to be a logical fallacy. But here's what's happened. Uh, even though this has been a very short amount of time for this to be ongoing, you're already hearing a few people within other areas of law enforcement basically say, look, if they can decrypt the phone to look at this case, hey, I've got a backlog of cases here where various people have used iPhones. Why can't I use that decryption algorithm to see what they have on their phones? And so then the question becomes, where do you draw the line? Uh, is it only going to be in the case of violent crime? Are you going to allow that, for example, in the case of property crime or financial crimes? If, for example, Bernie Madoff had encrypted data on an iPhone, would there be as much interest in decrypting his phone? Probably, because you want to see if you can get back all the money that was stolen. But what if instead of millions upon millions of dollars, the case in question involves a few $100s or 1,000? That 1,000 or 500 or whatever is just as important to the person that had it stolen as the amount of money that Madoff stole. So you've always got to balance a little bit the the need to assist with an investigation with um, the need to protect the privacy of not only the individuals involved in the case, but more importantly, the wider issue of electronic privacy in general. Um, I was watching uh, Fox News the other morning, and one of their legal analysts, I believe it was Andrew Napolitano, happened to mention that his problem with this kind of thing is that it's in essence forcing someone to do work for the government. In other words, the decryption algorithm doesn't yet exist. Okay. This is not a case like you can get a warrant, unlock a drawer, and read the paperwork that's in the drawer. The decryption algorithm does not exist at this point, as far as anyone knows. So that would mean that you are asking someone to create something that does not yet exist, and that's something that he seems to have a problem with philosophically. And how far can you go? How far are we willing to go down that direction? So keep an eye on this. As I said last week, it's an issue that I think is not going to go away anytime soon, no matter how this case is resolved. There are going to be other cases that come up, both in terms of iPhone use and electronics in general, where the rights of the individual are going to be somewhat at odds with what uh, law enforcement and the rest of society might prefer. So that's going to be, look for that to be an ongoing issue that's not going to go away anytime soon. Uh, on a different note, some of the other things that have come up this week. Um, One of the threads that's and we have a thread in the forum about this privacy issue, and it kind of quiets down for a day or two and then comes back again. I'll have a link to that. I think the link was in last week's show, and I'll be sure to put it in this one uh, so that you can kind of keep up to date. I do encourage you to read not only what our forum has about it, but also in other areas to see some of the other things that have come up in our forum this week. I'll post to them links to all of the stuff as usual. One of the things that's come up uh, is a let's go ahead before we tackle the how tos and tips and tricks. Let's deal with some other things that have appeared in the Apple news. I saw this just before the show. Haven't posted it yet in the forum, but it's kind of interesting. 9 to 5 Mac has a discussion or a little bit of a rumor, for lack of a better word, which says that the next OS version, 10.10.12, which would be at this point seems to be codenamed Fuji, will have Siri as an integrated part of the OS. That's going to be interesting. As you know, Siri is the voice recognition technology that has been in the iPhone and other iOS devices for some time now. And interestingly enough, Siri is one of those things that some people seem to have a great deal of success with it. Other people seem to not have quite as much success, particularly with the Hey Siri function. I haven't used Siri yet as much as I thought I would. I will tell you that the few times that I've tried using it on my iPad and iPhone, it's worked reasonably well for me, uh, except for one or two issues that I can attribute to user error. For example, I tried to create a calendar appointment for a meeting that I was going to be attending, and I told Siri the date and time to create the appointment, and nothing happened. And I tried again, and nothing happened. I tried a third time, and nothing happened. And I just assumed that I was doing something wrong, or it didn't recognize my voice, which some voice recognition technology has a little difficulty with from time to time. Uh, and as it turns out, I made a mistake in the uh, time. Let me see if I can describe for you without you seeing the screen what my mistake was. The meeting, this occurred last year, was scheduled for a certain date in January. When I gave it the date to create the meeting, I gave it the date for the previous year, which had already passed. In other words, I accidentally, even though the meeting was in January of 2015, let's just for the sake of argument say January 10th, 2015, I said when I did the post or the Siri entry, I said January of 2014. Well, it was smart enough to know that that had already passed. It couldn't create an entry on that date because that date had already passed. Unfortunately, it did not throw up any kind of a warning to let me know that I had made that mistake. And so it took me a little while to realize what was going on there as far as the type of error that was occurring. Uh, Another idea, another thing that has come up this week, there's been a lot of other Apple related things, and on the way of tips and tricks. Now, if you look at Kirk McLaren's Kirkville website, he has some thoughts about how useful Siri will be when it's integrated as part of the OS. And what I mean by that is one of the things that makes Siri useful on the iOS is because for a lot of people, the keyboards, even with the larger screens, the keyboards are kind of small. And so it's faster and more convenient to use voice recognition to do all kinds of things. Well, at the Mac, presumably, you have access to a keyboard, and many people type fast enough on a keyboard that they might find the process of entering a an event via Siri and then going back and double checking to make sure it's entered properly to be more time consuming than simply typing it in. For me, I'm a horrible typist. So if Siri does as well for me as Dragon does with voice recognition, there are going to be a lot of times where it might be just as convenient, even though I'm sitting at the mat, to use Siri to enter an event. You don't know how many times I've gone to enter an event in a calendar, um, and entered the event, moved on to something else, gone back to the calendar 20, 30 minutes later, maybe to close the calendar program or whatever, and discover that the event hasn't been fully entered because I forgot to click OK. So, for me, Siri being integrated in the OS is an interesting thing, particularly if it will do other things. Let me give just to give you an example. There was and has been around for a number of years in the operating system a function called speakable items. One of the things that you could do with speakable items, which I found kind of interesting, strictly to monkey around with, uh, is to create a script, either via Apple Script or Automator. And I presume that it would have worked with just about any scripting language that OS 10 understood. You create the script, you save the script as an application, and then you could use a function called speakable items to launch that script that you had created strictly by virtue of voice commands. It was an interesting thing to do. I didn't use it a whole lot because I'm not exactly what you would call a brilliant scripter. I script by the brute force method, keep poking at it until you get something that you need. But for people who could make scripts do some pretty incredible things, they might like uh, the speakable items aspect of things. That function has been around, if I remember correctly, since before OS 10, with varying degrees of success. Once again, some people have a great deal of difficulty with speakable items and getting it to recognize their voice. Other people don't. So that's something to keep in mind. I'll be curious to see if this uh, 10, 10, 12 release, which is uh, supposedly going to be announced at this year's Worldwide Developer Conference this summer, I'll be curious to see if it does indeed include Siri and what other features it might include. Some of the early rumors that I've seen have basically said that they don't call it this, but what it amounts to is a suggestion that this is kind of a tune-up release and a further refinement of El Capitan and some of the things that came before, and that they might pitch Siri as one of the new flagship type features. So we'll have to see what becomes of that. Also, uh, I have a link to a thread, to a forum thread. There are some users who have done updates to their systems recently and discovered that the somewhere after the update, they had various problems with their Ethernet connection. Wireless would function okay for most of the ones that reported the issue, but Ethernet would not. And the networking control panel would, or preference pane rather, would still throw up the message that says the Ethernet cable is unplugged, even though it wasn't. There is a fix for that. One of our members looks like uh, member Gashley, Gashale, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, uh, posted a link to an Apple article that describes the issue and what the problem is and the fix for it as well. The problem seems to be a uh, a link to or a corrupted file that occurred in some of the updates in the process of doing an update. And what happens here is, as long as that file is in the way, as long as that file is present, then you get this error Um, and so what they have on the in the article that I linked to in the show notes is some information about how do you tell if you've got this incorrect file, this corrupted file, and what you do to fix it. One of the fixes involves use of a terminal command, a couple of terminal commands to fix it. Now, I have not had this problem on my system, but um, if you that could very well be because I'm connecting wirelessly. So essentially, the problem is you will get something that says incompatible kernel extension configuration data. If you have version 3.28.1, you need an update. Okay. And if you can connect by Wi Fi, you'll be able to update to version 3.28.2 automatically. The article in question has some terminal commands that you can use to do the update. But if you're like me and you're allergic to terminal, okay, you can also do it by going into your recovery partition by using Command R and essentially forcing the OS to update itself again. They've apparently posted the fix, and you can reinstall OS 10 on your drive without reformatting your drive and losing your data. Basically, you're going to uh, go into the recovery mode and tell it that you're going to reinstall the OS, and it posts with the new version of that corrupted file. So that's a fix there. I'll have a link to that along with the appropriate terminal commands. I'm not a terminal genius. This information comes straight out of the current Apple documentation on the issue. The update date for that article is listed as February 28, 2016, as the date it's last modified. So it seems to be current. Um, the few forum members that have posted about this issue have noted that reinstalling seems to fix the issue. And apparently they have taken down the problem update and put up a corrected one. So keep that in mind. We'll have a link to that, all that information, and as well as a few other things in the show notes. Another thread that I ran into, I don't use pages a lot, so I haven't encountered this issue, but some of our users have noticed that with pages, if you're uh, importing some text, let's just say, for example, that you're using copy and paste to pull some text into pages. Sometimes you're left with a string of stuff that's not formatted in anything remotely resembling the way you want it. And worse yet, it doesn't always um, allow you to format it as easily as you would think. Well, there are a couple of things that you can do. I have a link to a forum thread about that. But one of the things that forum member dysfunction, welcome back, Diz, by the way, um, suggests that if you try using the command paste and match style, okay, which is Command Option Shift V, that usually fixes the problem and leaves you with something that either retains the right formatting or is a little more easily edited. So keep that one in mind um, if you're using pages. I suppose that in theory, you might have this with some other applications. I know that at least one of our users said that TextEdit doesn't really fix this situation. It doesn't seem to cause a problem in TextEdit, but it doesn't seem to fix it. I don't know if the paste and match style command would work there, but it's something to be worth a look at. All right. And along that note, with things that uh, you want to be sure that you keep a lookout for, when you're tooling around your Mac and looking at different tips and tricks and things like that, I want to uh, make a suggestion to you. If you've been hanging around the forum for a while, you know that my aversion to terminal is legendary. Okay. I am not a big terminal command person, primarily because I'm a horrible typist and make numerous mistakes. But we've already seen a couple of times in previous weeks where members were attempting to solve one problem, typed in a series of terminal commands, and either created a different problem or made an existing problem worse. That can occur quite easily because of either one of two things. It can be a typographical error of some point, of some type or other, or it could also be something that comes up because someone misunderstood what a particular terminal command does. Okay. Each one of those commands does something different. Some of them allow you to muck around with some files that most users should not be examining, toying with, however you want to put it. So do be careful when you're asked to enter terminal commands. Um, and keep in mind, it would not surprise me if you don't see some prankster putting up a thing on a website that says enter this command and watch what it does. And when you do, bad things happen. So you've got to, if you don't understand these commands, know your source, have a good backup, and always ask numerous questions to make sure that you understand exactly what's going on with these commands. Um, Now, the ones that are in the Apple fix that I'm going to post, uh, I glanced at them, and as I say, I'm not a terminal genius. These don't look uh, harmful very much, but once again, I do suggest you work from a backup. So if something does go wrong, you do not have a significant issue. And then also, I want to point out this week's Kirkville from Kirk the iTunes guy over on his website over at Kirkville, which is a site that I like and I've been known to go to regularly. He had a question. I'm not using this capability because I have not put a lot of my music in the cloud yet, but I know that many of you do, and this is something that some of you might want to do or need to do, and it has to do with, can you have two iCloud libraries? And yes, much like your regular iTunes library, you can. Now, some of you may know that if you launch iTunes with the Option key held down, it will bring up a dialog box which asks you if you want to quit, create a new library, or choose the library file that you want to work with. That same methodology holds true for photos. And here's the thing with that. If you choose to create a new library, okay, that alone does not give you a new iCloud music library. Okay. The iCloud music library is still going to use your existing library. If you want to create a new iCloud music library, you got to go one step, well, a couple steps further. You also, in addition to creating a new iTunes music library, you've got to create a new Apple ID for that second library. And then when you want to sign in to your new library, you're going to have to quit iTunes, relaunch it, and choose the correct library that you want to use. Each local library will contain different music. And then when you sign in to the iTunes store, you're going to have to make sure that you're using the account associated with that, the Apple ID that's associated with that library. Okay. Uh, if you purchase music from the Apple iTunes store, then it's only available with one of the Apple IDs. You would not need to download all that music and add it to the second library. I know that can be a little confusing. The Apple ID, remember, when you change the IDs like that and you log in under a different ID, remember, it doesn't just affect music, it affects everything you buy in the Apple store. So if you sync apps downloaded with new ID, that's going to be affected, all of that. I'll post a link to that from the Kirkville site because he goes into it in a little more detail. It's perhaps a little less confusing to see it in front of you as opposed to hearing me talk about it. Um, I'm hoping to add some things soon to give you some visual for some projects that I'd like to include directions to in future updates. One of the reasons I haven't done that is adding those kinds of things to the podcast can sometimes be rather time consuming, and I've got to get it down to something that doesn't take up a significant amount of time. And that looks like that's going to just about do it for this week's tips. I like the iCloud music one. It's one that I didn't know, I hadn't thought of. As I say, I'm not using iCloud music at this point, but it's a good thing to know that you can do. With regard to the idea of creating a new iTunes library, that little trick of launching with the Option key held down and it bringing you the option of creating a new library. I want to say two things about that. First of all, that's another function that comes from uh, using the Option key to click on existing dialogues. For example, clicking Option while clicking on the speaker icon in the menu bar brings up a dialogue that lets you choose sound inputs and outputs without having to go to the sound preference pane. And then this one, of course, brings up the dialogue to create a new library. In Photos or iPhoto, the same thing happens when you hold down the Option key while launching those programs. You get the option to create a new library as opposed to using your existing library. So all of those are things to keep in mind. And that's going to just about do it for this week's tips and tricks and all the other shenanigans. Hopefully, next week I'll probably have a few more things going on to have you check out. And I hope that you've enjoyed these tips. I'll have links to everything. Will be up in the show notes shortly. We'll see how everything goes. And until next time, this is your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude on the forum. As usual, if you have suggestions for the show or a tip or a topic that you'd like to see us talk about, let us know, and we'll see what we can do about that. Until next week, I'll see you in the forum, and thanks for joining us.